Feel free to come on camera. Welcome. This is our event with academic language experts and Avi Staiman. We are very, very pleased to welcome him as our guest today for today's session, which is titled Building a Business, What You Need to Know About Academic Translation and Editing. And I've placed emphasis on that you because this is your chance to ask questions, to pick Avi's brain, to learn more about this exciting field of academic translation and academic editing. Let me introduce myself. My name is Annalise Finnegan. I'm the Academic Director of the Graduate Program in Translation and Interpreting here at the Center for Applied Liberal Arts at the NYU School of Professional Studies. And on your side, we're joined here by students from the MS in Translation and Interpreting. We also have some of our colleague students from the MS in Professional Writing and the MS in Publishing programs. So we have a really fascinating cross-section of students here today. Now, since you're at this session and you're interested in this area, I'm sure you'll be interested in part 2 of this conversation, which is coming up in 2 weeks. And that is going to be called, So You Finished Your Translation and Editing Degree, Now What? With Gabrielle Fine, also from Academic Language Experts. I'm going to put an RSVP link into the chat so that you can sign up for that session as well. So that's all for housekeeping. And then it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Avi Staiman, who is the founder and CEO of Academic Language Experts, a company dedicated to assisting academic scholars to prepare their research for publication and bring it to the world. He is also the co-host of the New Books Network Scholarly Communication podcast, which I recommend checking out. It's really great. And Avi has helped thousands of scholars share their invaluable research in prestigious academic fora around the world. So Avi, just to start out, I'm sure that our attendees would love to hear about how you built such a successful business and how you got started.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation, Annalise. I want to start off by saying that I think my parents would be very proud because if they would have known 20 years ago that I'd be speaking to NYU students when I don't think they would have believed it. I don't think that I could have gotten into NYU back in the day. So I'm excited. I really appreciate the opportunity and excited to speak. And I want to give you kudos also on dealing with the practical side of translation because the business side of it, because I think that very often there's a lot, theory, which is important, and practice, which is critically important. But then, sometimes people step out into the real world and then ask themselves, okay, what the hell do I do now? And I think it's really important to actually kind of take this topic, dive into it head on, and you'd be surprised. It can be really interesting and fascinating and can open new avenues and pathways for success. So anyway, you asked me, about how this all happened, and the answer is by mistake, entirely by mistake, and I'll be happy to share. I was doing a degree in Israel, which is where I live, and the degree course was in Hebrew, and I knew Hebrew at the time, but I did not want to have to write my papers in that language, and I asked my lecturer if he would mind if I could write in English. And he kindly agreed, and I wrote my papers throughout the course in English. And at the end of the course, he said, "Oh wow, this is impressive. I appreciate your writing. Do you mind translating my article for me?" And I said, "Okay, how hard could that be?" Meanwhile, 4 months later, I was still sort of stumbling over what in the world he was talking about and how I was going to get that conveyed in a clear and coherent manner. But that kind of was my entry into the world of academic translation, academic editing. From there, I started, basically going up to my own lecturers and advisors and asking them if they needed help and they needed support with their own research. Most of them kindly said no, but a handful said yes, and it sort of grew from there. So that was kind of that was what planted the seeds originally. I was really working on my own lecturer's research. And then over time, and we can speak about, kind of how this happened, but what happened over time is that I realized I'm not an expert in every fields. In fact, I'm not an expert in most fields, right? And that was a little bit of like brought me down to earth, right? Because I was sort of up on this high from my professor asking me to, and feeling like, oh, you must think I'm a brilliant linguist. To then getting hit with a classics paper where I didn't understand what was going on because I wasn't a classics, student, and realizing, okay, what do I do now? And that was sort of how the beginnings of trying to build a business, going from being an individual translator to trying to be more of a business owner. That was kind of how it started.
That's really terrific. And actually, I was wondering, well, let me open it up. I have some questions that I want to ask, but all of you who are here as participants, you are welcome to enter your questions in the chat. You're welcome to raise your icon hand and come on mic if you feel brave doing so as we proceed through our time together. So that would be my next question for you is, the question of specialization is always a vibrant one in the field of translation. So what advice do you give in terms of specialization for those who know they want to be translators and are embarking on the field?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm definitely pro, but I understand the concern. And let's start with the elephant in the room, and then maybe we can try and figure out how to slay the elephant somehow. I think the elephant, especially for many new translators that I speak with, is, okay, I get it. I'd love to specialize, but I don't have that luxury to be able to pick and choose my projects. Maybe 20 years down the line, when I'm getting bombarded from projects here and there, I can pick what I want and pick what I don't want. But when I'm starting out, I kind of have to take what comes, right? That's sort of the question. And that's a very legitimate, thought, is that beggars can't be choosers in that sense. And when we're starting out, we kind of take what comes. What I would say is try and think about what you really enjoy, what you're really passionate about outside of translation, right? Obviously, if you're studying translation, you enjoy that very much. But I'm assuming you have other hobbies. So for some people, it might be literature. For some people, it might be the automotive industry. For some people, it might be computer science. Think about what else it is that you enjoy, and think about who are the people that are involved in that field, in that industry. Or maybe you really like marketing. You like helping people cross cultures. It's not just about translation, but it's also about thinking, okay, they have this marketing slogan in their source language. How do I give over that marketing slogan in the target language, but it's a totally different phrase, but that's what they want. I'll give you an example of something gone terribly wrong. I assume that most of you here are familiar with Tinder, or, I personally don't have a profile. I've been married for 15 years now, but for those who do have a Tinder profile, Tinder has its issues with sometimes with people, not acting as they should. And so they decided to come up with a branded, sort of spin-off, which was called Kinder. Okay. So they basically swapped out the T for a K, and they thought, oh, this would be a nicer, people who don't want like some of the more, brash people would go onto this version. Little did they realize that anyone in the field speak German, right? You know where I'm going with this. Anyone who speaks German realizes that Kinder, it looks like Kinder. And then it got mistaken for a child app. And that was really devastating. And we're talking about, a decision which we're talking about one word, right? So how much would it have cost, even if you take the most expensive translator in the world, right? How much would it have cost for them to actually get a German professional in to, vet that decision? Or I'll give you another example. I got a call about 2 years ago from a marketing company who said, we are getting absolutely blasted and mocked on Facebook because we have this giant billboard out in the center of Jerusalem, which has really embarrassing sort of mistakes on it. And everyone's just taking pictures and like sharing, and it's going viral. Like, what do? We need your help, right? So obviously I said, well, you have to take down the billboard, but they probably spent a good, $20,000 on that billboard, but they didn't bother getting the copy on the billboard translated. So anyway, I'm going on a little bit of a tangent, but back to the main question. This is an opportunity to really pick an area that you really are interested in, and you have to be proactive. That doesn't mean you need to be a person who's an extrovert. Maybe you're an introvert, and that's okay. But you need to be proactive in the sense that wherever your potential clients or the specialization that you're curious or interested in, wherever those people are, you need to be there. Now, that could be digital, that could be online, that could be in person, and that could be in any number of a number of ways. And I'll tell you another mistake. So I'll give you an example. So I started an academic translation and editing company. Where does my office sit? And I really took this to an extreme. My office is in the National Library in Jerusalem, right? That is where the academics hang out, right? It's like, it would be like, opening up in the Library of Congress, like, next door, opening up, right? But there's a logic to that because I get to interact and see the people that I'm working with on a common basis. And then there are people who we don't work with, but who say, oh, that's interesting. I overheard you. I actually have had people in the cafeteria next to me say, I've overheard your conversation. That's really interesting. I could use your help, right? But if I was never sitting there, it never would have happened. And again, so it's sort of like putting yourself in the place or that you're going to be there. One other thing, that I think is really critical is, you'll probably get a lot of advice to start going to translation and editing and interpreting conferences. And that's really good advice. Go to ATA, go to the other, be active in those associations. However, don't go there looking for business. If you go to the ATA conference with your card and try to get business, you may be able to get some companies who you can, then do freelance work for. But if you're looking for direct clients or you're looking to build up your own business, it's sort of like going to shark infested waters and trying to find the one fish, right? You're not going to be that successful. However, let's go back to our example of the automotive freak, right? If anyone here is a real car geek and just loves cars, have you considered going and if you go to a car conference, right? I don't know, autonomous driving, that's, really interesting. And there's a ton of translation being done nowadays in that field. Like we're talking, hundreds of millions of words per year. If you're a car geek, sign up for an automotive conference. I promise you, you will be the only translator there, okay? On me, or maybe one of two. It's not what's done. It's not what people are thinking about. It's not what translators usually aren't willing to put themselves out there. Go into that conference. If you have enough money to scratch together a booth, great. But you don't even need to do that. Just bring cards, dress professionally, and just say, if you ever need, this is my card. You will be, if you pick the right conference, you'll find that all of a sudden people will be coming to you instead of you coming to them. So that's, that's sort of a way to overcome this challenge of, okay, if I want to specialize, but how do I even know, how do I have the luxury to be able to do so? The way you do that is by sort of going and helping and being present at those places where your potential clients could be present. If you're more into literature, right, that's tougher because we're not talking about big corporate companies, but maybe we're talking about publishers. So go to publishing conferences. Okay, there might be a handful of there might be a few more translators there. There might be a little bit more competition, but even so, if I assume that even in this room, there's probably French translators and German translators, right? Everyone has their own specialty and expertise. So that's what I would say is the first step. The second step, okay, in terms of specializing, is we make a mistake, I think, and I hope this doesn't come off the wrong way. I think sometimes translation programs make a mistake in teaching. It's not a mistake. It's right in that you should be translating accurately and faithfully to the source. That's part and parcel of what translation is. However, when you get into the real world and you're working with, companies, especially corporate, and academia, I find this as well. Sometimes the biggest disservice you can do is translating something too accurately. Okay, and what I mean by that is that you need to understand who are the clients who's the population, who's the audience that you're trying to speak to, and will your message be conveyed to them? And I think we sometimes get stuck in this fallacy of we want to respect and honor the writer, the source writer, and therefore we're scared to take ownership and say, okay, I'm going to make this a text that sounds good on its own. And there may be very rare cases whereby the authority of the source is so important that we want to sort of be hesitant. Like I'll give you an example. Sometimes we deal with primary source text from like the Middle Ages. So there we're a little bit more hesitant to start, changing and adding in our creative license, because we say, no, there's a reason this has become a classical text. It's not for us to go ahead and say, well, we are actually going to interpret it in our way. Or I'll give you another example. In qualitative research, okay, so qualitative research is research whereby it's heavily based on interviews. We're interviewing a population and you're trying to learn certain information from your interviews. So there, what we actually face this a lot, we'll get a qualitative study and we need to translate it into English. And we say to ourselves, okay, the original author made mistakes in the interviewee made mistakes in their speech. So now, do we make mistakes in the translation to reflect that? That's a serious question, which haven't seen a good answer to. But I think like there's a certain respect that we need to have for the speaker, and not just say, okay, we're going to turn it into beautiful, prose and poetry, when it's not that. But those are the exceptions to the rule. The rule is that your job is to create in most cases, is to create a text that stands on its own, that's independent, and that if someone comes along and reads your text, they're not going to say, well, was this translated right? Is this translatees, or this doesn't fully flow or make sense? It's got different sentence structure than I'm used to. The second someone has to pause, and I think we've all read books where we've said to ourselves after the first page, this is a translation, right? And then we look back at the cover page and say, oh yeah, I'm right. Like that's a translation, right? And we sort of knew it even though we didn't know it. So and that's hard when you're first starting out, because there's a certain amount of natural hesitance to what you're doing. But if if Daniel's really into philosophy and he's like, I know this field, and he's going to go and conquer that, and Seth's really into biking, and he's like, I know this field, I'm confident with it, then yeah, like you can carve out a space for yourself. In fact, you'll become more valuable because you're the only one in the space who's really doing it properly. So that's kind of how I would recommend going about specializing. 100% you should specialize. I can tell you in terms of academic language experts, which is the company I run, and I assume if you're here, you at least have some interest in academic materials, we limit our translators and editors to 8 areas of specialization, and even that is probably too many. So what I mean by that is that you don't just sign up as a translator or editor with us. You sign up as a translator or editor in sociology or social work or culture or economics, right? And the translators that we are turning to for economics are not the same translators that we're turning to for computer science. So that's sort of just kind of like, and actually, the worst CVs, to be honest, and maybe I'm jumping into Gabrielle's session, the worst CVs that I see are the people who translate to and from too many languages. Okay. If you're like, I see people who are French, German, Spanish, Ukrainian to Russian, French, Albanian, and English. And it's like, well, you're the master of all trades, but maybe not, or jack of all trades, master of none. Like, pick something you're really good at and become and just work at that. And also people who say, I do marketing and I do finance and I do medical. And I said, okay, well, you have an MBA and you have, and you went to medical school and you are a marketing guru. Like that's not possible. So, it's better to sort of, pitch yourself in a more specific way, even though your market size will be smaller, but the fit to what you're doing to what your potential clients are going to want is going to be a lot better, and therefore you're going to get better hits.
That's wonderful. Thanks. Specialization is just so important, and thanks for those perspectives on it. I have a question about, we have a course that all our students take in editing and revising for translators in the translation and interpreting program. And one of the things covered in there is the TEP process, or translation, editing, proofreading. And so I saw on your company information that you have this 4 eyes principles. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that, why it's important, and what kind of feedback you give your translators.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So put it this way. I'll start by saying that on the one hand, I think that, translators need to edit themselves. I don't make a distinction in my mind between translators or editors in the sense that a translator can send an unedited text to a client or to a company or whatever it may be. In fact, I was surprised I had to have this conversation today with a translator who sent us something that they didn't even run through spell check. And when I pointed this out, he said, "Oh, well, I thought you're editing it." And I said, "Yeah, we are editing it, but that doesn't excuse sending something that's not, that's not up to par." That being said, even the best translators, really, even the best translators, do benefit so greatly from editors and proofreaders, to the point where I can name on one hand the translators who I feel like I just read through and send it off. That was actually a big mistake that I thought I was this brilliant. I had this brilliant, light bulb moment when taking you back to when I first started the company. I said, "Oh, this is going to be easy. I'll just find brilliant classics people and brilliant English lit people and they'll just do the work, and I'll just, kind of match them up. I'll be the car salesman and off they go." Right. And it really was like a slap in the face when I learned that, wow, no, like even really excellent translators need revisers and need editors and need proofreaders. And the truth is that when you think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense, because we're creating a new text, especially if you adopt my approach, which is take ownership over the text, get involved, change around sentence structure, swap out idioms that aren't relevant in the target language for idioms that are. When you're doing all of that, you're an author, right? A good translator starts with being a good writer. If you're not a good writer, you're not going to be a good translator. That's what it comes down to. So if you're writing a text from scratch, and even, the Nobel Prize laureates, not only would I say even they have editors, they probably have more editors than the rest of us do, right? There's probably one of the reasons that, that the writing is what it is. Sometimes actually, I think, and this is a separate conversation which deserves its own, we don't get the credit that maybe we should get, because we are so heavily involved. The way I like to put it is that, we're actually sometimes acting as like a mirror to our authors, right? It's like, well, here's what you look like, just a little bit different and a little bit like, with a little bit of a tint, with a Instagram filter. And sometimes they're like, "Oh God, that's what I look like," right? And that's what we're doing when we're translating. But back to your question about editing and proofreading. So yes, our principle is that a translation is always translated, then edited by a second editor. Now, that's really nice and easy for me to say as as a company owner. I build a structure whereby I charge a certain amount, and then a certain amount is paid to the translator, a certain amount is paid to the editor, a certain amount is left for overhead and staff, and etc. What do you do? As I imagine that most of you will be, you may go and work as part of a company, but let's say you want to work on your own as an independent translator. How do you do that? You can't be two people unless you're, schizophrenic. I'm not sure you're going to be able to be your, a translator and editor. So what I would recommend is you can pay for it, although that's tough because, you're going to need to charge enough from the outset to be able to pay someone else, which seems a bit, can be a little bit intimidating, right? I know people, and I don't think you should do this, but I think some new translators feel like, oh, well, I have to charge towards the bottom. And we can talk about rates later on, because I'm new, which I don't think is necessarily true. I think you should judge yourself against the competition and against what other people are doing, not against how many years you've been. The number of years you've been in the field really is a meaningless statistic, other than the fact that you do get better over time if you're, serious about your profession. But what I would recommend is, and what I actually saw someone local, a group doing this locally, is they came up with like what's it called? Like a group. I apologize. I'm losing my English from not living in an English-speaking country. A co-op. They created a translators co-op. So essentially, basically, it's this group of like 10 individuals, and it could be, I don't know, it's possible that they studied together, so it could be all the people who are sitting in this room, create a co-op, and then basically every translation that comes in that you complete, you send to someone else in the co-op, and you're responsible for reviewing a certain amount every month, and you also get your work reviewed a certain amount every month. So first of all, if you're not busy if you're not busy right away, you have all of a sudden what to do. Second of all, everything is being edited and proofread. That's really valuable to clients. Like that's something that you should be flaunting and that you should be throwing out there and saying like, you're paying me for translation. You're actually going to get two things. You're going to get translating and editing, or translating, editing, proofreading. And third of all, this network, if you learn to trust each other and it works well, you're just going to end up referring business to each other. One person's busy, they'll end up giving business to you. You're busy, you're going to end up giving business to them. I think it's a win-win-win all around. So that's something I highly recommend, sort of as a model, which is easy to put together. Obviously, you have to trust the people around you. You need to know if you're a hard worker, you need to know that they're going to be hard workers, and vice versa. Because if one person's always getting the proof, the edits, and the other person's not bothering to contribute back into the pool, then that's going to be problematic. But I think if your approach is, well, I'm going to try and do this on my own, I think you're going to end up with a lot of frustration and heartache, because I think you're going to get some poor feedback and you're not going to necessarily know why from your clients. And then you're going to be frustrated, or you're just not going to hear from them. That's the worst. When it's like you work really hard on something, then you just don't hear, and then you don't know. And then you're not sure whether you should call and find out. Why leave things to chance? If you know that you've got someone who's, kind of your backup, you're going to learn from that experience, and you're also going to be providing a much, much better product to your client. So that's kind of what I would recommend.
Fantastic. And we've had 2 questions come in for you from a
Brilliant. Excellent.
The first one is, what are some introductory resources you can recommend students who are interested in stepping into academic translation to look into?
Okay, so that's a really good question. Well, my website. No, well, let's tackle this in 2 different ways. There's the business side, right, and then there's the sort of formal training side. In terms of the formal training, it's sort of like I don't know that there are many like programs dedicated specifically to academic. I assume that there's probably a course at NYU that you relate to academic translation and editing. There is from what I saw, there's a course coming up that's being given by the CIUP, if I'm not mistaken, which is based in the UK. They've got a course coming up, I think, with a woman named Kathy Tingle. She's doing an introduction to academic editing. So I would recommend checking that out. I think that's coming up in April, if I'm not mistaken, March, April. So I actually spoke with her this week. She seems lovely, and I'm optimistic about that. In terms of just on the business end of things, I highly recommend, if any of you come across, I don't know if she's related to NYU, Chris Durbin. Chris Durbin, yeah, okay. So anyone who hasn't checked out Chris Durbin, be sure to do so. She is awesome. I'm a big fan of Chris's. Chris talks about how to work really hard, but also position yourself as like an expert in the field and essentially charge what it is that you want to charge and really make a business out of translation. Watching one of her lectures, I think, will save you 5 years of like learning things on the fly and on the job. So I highly recommend tuning into her. But some of the principles that I'm talking about today sort of come from that of making sure that you're that you're really thinking about the client's needs. And by the way, and going back to that thematically, I did this in the beginning, and people thought I was crazy, but I didn't. I actually think it was great that I did it. I used to call clients and say, "Can we go meet for coffee?" And some of them would be like, "Right, the world is digital, the world is virtual. Like, just email me, right?" And I said, "No, I want to get to know like what it is that makes you tick, what you care about, who I want to get a feel for your office. Like, I know it sounds like a bit esoteric, but it'll actually give you like a vibe for what's going on there. Some companies are super formalistic. Like, for example, we almost never use apostrophes because it's like, right, it's academia, and we're a little bit like sort of old fashioned. And then there are some, websites that it's all like, user experience and sounding cool and sounding hip. And that's how you need to talk. So you really have to get to know kind of what it is, who your audience is. But yeah, definitely check out Chris's materials. Our blog is chock full of sort of, it's really, a lot of it is intended for academics, for scholars, especially for scholars starting out. So how to put together a book proposal, right? If you're trying to get a book published with a major university publisher, that's something that if you learn how to do that, that's the other thing. If you learn how to do the things that the clients need to know how, you'll actually become even more valuable. So in the world of academic translation and editing, if instead of just saying, well, my thing is language, if you take 5 minutes to actually look, okay, this scholar wants to publish in Stanford University Press. Instead of just saying, well, here's my rates for translation, you actually take 10 minutes and look at the Stanford website and see what they need and actually send them for free. Send them a list. Here's a broken down list of the materials you're going to need. Do you have that all prepared? You've just become like, made yourself invaluable, right? It's not that much work. I'll give you another secret of the trade. Sometimes people come to me and say, what publisher should I publish in? And I'm like, I don't know. Well, it turns out there's a website called the Association of University Presses, and you can go on their website and they've actually got like a map of different fields and which publishers are interested in that, right? So it's like, and it took me, I only found out about this last year. And it's like, it literally takes me 5 minutes. People are so thankful. They say, oh my gosh, how did you know all the different publishers and what they're interested in? You know, and it's not terribly difficult. It takes time to learn. It takes time to, to read up and to get into things, but don't only think of yourselves as linguists, because that would be limiting. So again, if you're going into academia, think about which field, right? Did you do, maybe this is, right? This is most, everyone here is a master's student. Is that correct? I'm guessing most of you did not study translation as a first degree? No. Okay, great. So you all have another area. If let's say you do want to go into academia, okay, or into academic translation editing, you already have your bachelor's. Think about all the coursework you did in your bachelor's. Now think about what courses you really loved or which things you really got to know well. Great. You're all of a sudden you have a specialty, okay, without even necessarily knowing it or thinking about it too much. Or if there's an area that you just read up on because you're just fascinated by that area. So anyway, you already have more skills than you may think, and over time you'll build that up.
That's great. You're really sending me back. I was an acquisitions editor in a previous life.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so the AAUP, they're really sending me back there.
What press did you work at?
I was at Yale and then at Syracuse.
Oh, brilliant.
On the acquisition side. And actually, I'm fairly sure that we worked with academic translators and academic editors as we're going along, because there are projects where we would even recommend to the author, you really need to have a translator or a language expert go through this with you.
So I'm just curious. Anise has written her language set, which is fantastic. And I know that what are some of maybe everyone could just write in their language set, because I would say that when we're talking about like being present in the place where your clients hang out, so you may not, you may or may not be able to do that live, but be aware that in the academic, if we're honing in on academia for a minute, the ESL, is where most of our business comes from, to be very perfectly honest. That's English as a second language scholars. So that means our main business comes not from the US, it comes from European countries and European scholars or Asian scholars who are trying to publish in English. And it's a big field. Is it the most lucrative compared to, big pharma? No. But if it's something that you're passionate about, there's more than enough work in business there. You have to build up a reputation. You have to build up a name. People have to get to know you. But think about what country or what universities you're going to be targeting. So if you're a French to English translator, well, maybe you want to start following Sorbonne's social media, right? And figuring out who's in charge of the research department in the Sorbonne where, in the field that you're interested in, and reach out to them. And same goes, okay, so Benjamin's got Spanish and French. Spanish, you think about Spain. Is it, maybe there are South American countries that would be relevant. You've probably heard the phrase before, publish or perish, okay? And what that means essentially is that academics who aren't publishing all the time are just not progressing in their careers. I have my critique with that, by the way. I don't think that it's necessarily good for science and for scholarship, but no one really asked me, so who cares? That just seems to be the way it is, and that's the rule. So what happens is the nice part, one of the nice parts about our business, and every business has its own, unique challenges and the challenge of the business is that we're working with literally the most pedantic, neurotic people in the world. And I say that with the utmost love and care, but that's, there's a reason that academics have gotten to where they've gotten to, mainly because they pay attention to detail and they're sticklers and and they check themselves. So they're going to check you. So that's a downside, right? The upside is once you do build that trust, once you do build that relationship, that connection, it's not a one-off. This isn't a marriage, right? This is why I discourage people from getting into the field of I'm going to translate marriage certificates or I'm going to translate birth certificates. There's nothing wrong with that. Go for it. First of all, it's boring. You'll do 5 of them and you'll be like, okay. I mean, it might be easy money because you have a template and then it's you just fill in the details and it's great, but you're not really using your creative juices. But also it's well, how many times is one person going to come to you for a birth certificate? Hopefully not more than one, right? Why would they need their birth certificate translated more than once? An academic who you develop a relationship with, well, all of a sudden it's 2 or 3 papers a year. It's a book every 2 or 3 years. It's a conference lecture once a year. It's a book review of someone else's book once a year. All of a sudden you've got yourself business. And you've got yourself steady continuing business. That's always a question you want to ask yourself is, am I pursuing one-offs or am I pursuing, a steady flow and a steady stream? Because what happens once you have clients that are repeat clients is you're not constantly grinding, right? In the beginning, you're going to grind. There's no way around it, right? You're going to have to work hard. You're going to have to get your name out there. You're going to have to, put yourself out there a little bit, but you don't want to be doing that 10 years from now, right? Now I do that every day because I run a business, right? And I've decided, okay, I don't want to just do things myself. I want to grow. I want to actually, help. I actually want to help as many scholars as possible. In order to do that, I need to bring on staff. So I'm grinding, morning to night forever. But if that's not your thing and you're just happy to have your work, then, be strategic about who it is kind of that you're pursuing. So again, think about where are the majority of the clients. I could try and get business in America, but let's say 1 out of every 10 scholars would need my services. The truth is, between us, I think everybody needs editing, right? Even doesn't matter what language. And I think it's a real fallacy that only non-native English speakers need editing. I think that all of us need editing. I edit my own materials in English, or I choose our best editors to edit them for me. But think about, whereas if you're turning to the Sorbonne, maybe 9 out of 10 of the scholars there, instead of 1 out of 10 being interested, 9 out of 10 might be interested, or at least potential clients, right? So you have to, so your chances of success, even if it's 1 in 10, and by the way, your success will not be higher than 1 in 30, for sure, starting out. What I mean by that is get used to rejection, and that's okay. It's really okay. I think it's a good lesson for life in general that, most things. And that doesn't mean that, I'm not trying to be a downer. I just mean that a no, don't take a no as a reflection on your abilities or your quality or the way, if you can learn something from a no, that's great. If you can ask someone, well, can I ask why? That's great. But know that you're going to have to put yourself out there again and again and again until you figure out sort of what the magic potion is to really kind of A, have the skills that you're actually saying you have, but B, be able to reflect them in an accurate way. But yeah, that's sort of how I would, sort of pursue it. By the way, also, if you're thinking of academia is bigger than just scholars. Okay. What I mean by that is that if you're in the STEM fields, there's high tech is full of academics who have become researchers at, in tech companies, right? Some tech companies have much bigger, almost all tech companies have much bigger budgets than universities might. So if you're a STEM freak, that might be, something that you're interested in. Brilliant. Fantastic. Right. That might be an avenue. There are think tanks, right? Which might be, there might be political think tanks. There might be, there might be NGOs, right? We do a lot of work for human rights and those sort of organizations. Put it this way, or I'll put it in a different way. Every serious organization has to do research, right? Even an NGO who's, they've spent $5 million in programming and trying to solve hunger in Africa. How are they going to check whether it worked or not? They're going to have to do research. And it's not enough in most European countries. There's, at the very least, they're going to have to be publishing in English, in French, sometimes in Spanish, in German. If you're Eurocentric in terms of your background and expertise, as I see some of you are, realize that there's a lot of this going on. In fact, there's a lot of translation is on the rise in terms of an industry, which is pretty amazing, meaning there is more work than there used to be, okay, and this is a really important point, and I'm sorry if I'm rambling here, but I hope that it's, but I think this is really critical. You're going to hear, if you go to these conferences, right, with other translators, first of all, you're going to bring the age down significantly, because sometimes I call them geriatric, centers, and I don't mean to be ageist or to be mean. It tends to be an older profession, and sometimes there is a feeling of among some of the older generation, and I'm sorry for generalizing here, but there's a sense that that machine translation is coming for us, and we need to, sort of like capitulate and duck and crumble. I really, really don't believe in that. I think the opposite. I think that I'm not because I don't believe in Google. Believe me, I'm not betting against Google, right? Like we'd be dumb to bet against them. They have all the cards stacked, all the poker chips stacked in their corner. That being said, the fear, the concept behind it is that we are going to take masses of information. How does machine learning work? How does AI work? We take mass quantities of information. We learn from the comparisons between them. I know I'm simplifying. And we then can extrapolate to future scenarios and for future situations. So how does that work? How does that translate, so to speak, in language? Is that they learn from masses, which is fine. And then it sort of will spit out what the conglomeration of all of the materials, what the most common or the most frequent or accepted outputs are. Now, if we are part of that sort of just spitting out, words that are common, that are, or the way that we translate is sort of run of the mill, then yeah, we should be worried. But if we are coming to give this added value of, no, we're actually going to think about what we're writing. We're going to swap out idioms and analogies. We're going to suggest different ideas based on the culture, the target culture, or the target audience. Then I think we add a value that there's never in the, like not only do we not need to be worried about machine translation, we actually, just by doing a good job, will differentiate ourselves in a way where it's like, great, let them all race to the bottom while I'm actually doing professional work. Because I can't tell you how many clients come to us. I would say probably 1 out of every 3 clients that come to us, it's directly after they've been burned either by a machine solution or by another human solution who was relying on a machine solution or just was doing it on their own and doing a poor job. Because there's so much, excuse my language, shit out there, is actually what gives us the opportunity to differentiate and to be really good at what we do. And you'll be surprised that if you take your job seriously and you continue learning and you develop professionally, you'll be so different than everything else out there. In fact, this is something that maybe I'll ask Chris if I can share this afterwards. She has a table. She did this brilliant table. You know what? Maybe let me see if I can quickly bring it up, because I think that the French speakers. Is everyone here a French speaker? I'm not, but at least some of you are. So you'll appreciate this. Okay. Is there any way, Annalise, that you could give me sharing? Oh, I think I can. Can I share my screen? Yes, I can. Okay. So here we go. Excuse the background clutter here. Okay. You're seeing some of my other stuff also. For some reason, I can't get out of it, but okay. So you see here that she puts in a source text. Okay. She puts in the DeepL, which is machine translation. Okay. A human translator A, which is sort of like your run-of-the-mill generic translator. Hello? Can you still hear me?
Hi, we can hear you, but the screen sharing, it's just showing up as dark. Could you try it one more time?
Okay, let's try it one more time. My apologies. Yeah, I saw that everything. Okay. Better now?
There we go.
Okay. Okay, so you see the source text here. I'm sorry if it's a bit small, but hopefully you can read it. You see there's the DeepL, which is the machine translation version. You see human translator A, and then you see human translator B. And I don't know if you'll have enough time to really look at it in depth, but what she does here, which I just think is absolutely brilliant, is you'll see that human translator A is moderately better than DeepL, meaning what they're doing is they've either edited the DeepL machine translation, or they've just translated on their own, but it's fairly accurate. It's not there aren't necessarily gross mistakes, neither in the language or in the fact that it's a translation, meaning it's accurate to the source and it's grammatically correct. Yet if you read it next to human translator B, you'll understand that it's a totally different world in terms of the clarity of communication level. And you see here that, she even assigns how much each one, can charge for what they're doing because of the value of what they're doing. I'm not here to tell you what to charge. I don't think that's, that's a whole different conversation. But I think I just love this chart because I think it just summarizes in one page kind of what I believe in terms of the quality or the way that we should be approaching translation. Anyway, I can check with Chris afterwards if I can share this sort of as a resource for the group.
That's terrific. And we have some questions flowing in, so I'll just go to the next one if that's okay. So what are some characteristics of academic translation that distinguish it from other types of technical translation? And what advice would you give to a student who wants to work in that field?
Okay, so in terms of the difference between, all right, so I'll talk about what makes academic translation unique. Technical is sort of a throw-all term, so it's hard to know meaning there are academic translations that can be very technical, but that doesn't necessarily make them technical translations. I would say that academic translation, you keep in mind, the same way I said that with a client, right, with a high tech, we need to keep in mind who their end user is. We need to keep in mind what the end goal for academics is. And the end goal for academics is publication, publish or perish, right? So they want to publish in a journal or as part of a book. That's their end goal. Now, in order to do that, their research needs to be conveyed clearly. It needs to be conveyed concisely often. One of the big problems I see in translation is sometimes there are word count discrepancies. And all of a sudden we have a text that was 5,000 words and it can only be 6,000, according to the journal. And all of a sudden we have 8,000 after our translation. And then the scholar goes, oh, what am I going to do with this? Right? So knowing those things ahead of time, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold here. Knowing some of those things ahead of time can actually be really helpful. You can actually sort of preempt and prevent some of the uncomfortable situations. I would say that academic is similar to literary in the sense that we're really, especially with humanities and social sciences, the medium can be the message. So how we write is really critical because I think that as all academics, we judge our students not only by the content, but also how it is that they write, in the same way that academics are judged by their peers in peer review. Now, let's keep in mind that there is this peer review stage, which means that everything that the scholar is going to be saying is they're going to be judged and reviewed by their peers. And what that means is that we really need to be extra careful that everything sounds, that everything reads well, that everything's clear, that everything sounds exactly right. Because if not, someone will pick up on that at some point in the process. So so we really need to be super careful about, about the quality of the language that we're using. I would say that sometimes, there's terminology that we might not be familiar with at a time, even if it is a field that we know. I mean, it's, scholars are coming to bring something novel, to bring something innovative to the table, and it may be something that we're not previously familiar with. So we need to understand that there's going to be an interaction with the clients. Sometimes what I like to do, especially with books, is I like to say, prepare a glossary, or either we'll do it or they'll do it, and let's go through the main terms before we even start the translation, because that way, once I know what the trickiest terms are, then I can actually, it's fairly easy to go, and it'll make my whole process go much smoother. I often recommend sending 2 or 3 pages when you start out. You don't want to, if you're not on the same page as the scholar in terms of what they're looking for, what they want, something more formal, something more, then you want to know that early. You don't want to wait until you've done, 100 hours on a 40-page paper, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh God, we've got a problem here. And then you're stuck. So check in early, check in often, be communicative, ask questions, do your own research. Academic translators end up being quarter-time research assistants. And I don't, and it's important not to fall into the trap of doing everything for the scholar, because there are scholars that will sort of suck you in. And once you're in, you're like, it's impossible to get out. But know that, you know, there may be things, you know, if there, I'll give you a very simple sort of silly, well, it's not silly, but a simple example is, let's say your text is in French and they're quoting a primary source, which actually was originally in English. If you translate from their French to English, it's going to look silly because the source was actually originally English. So what you need to do is you need to go to the library, or you need to look it up online to make sure you find the original English source and put that in with those page numbers. And that's just something that, like, over time you pick up on. Also, another big thing that sort of makes academic translation and editing unique is style sheets. And this can be a real pain sometimes. But Chicago Manual of Style, American Medical Association, MLA, APA, depending on what field you decide to go in. If you're in social sciences, you probably need to know APA. If you're in the humanities, more Chicago Manual of Style. If you're in the STEM areas, maybe more AMA Vancouver, and becoming familiar with the style guide and with the major formatting rules. Every journal likes, for some reason, adding in their own wrinkles and their own nuances to what they're asking for. Every journal has, you know, their own Bible on how exactly they want it. But can I tell you something? In the beginning, I used to do that sort of as part of the process. And then I said, wait, that's silly. Why don't I charge extra for doing formatting? And that was it took me like 2 years to do that. And then I realized, oh, that's a really easy way. It's not easy because it's a lot of work on my end. And instead of just kind of doing it as a throw in and like, oh, I'll be nice and spend an extra 20 hours formatting your paper, I'll say you have two options. I'm not forcing you to do either. You can either just translate with us and you can take care of the formatting, or we'll do everything for you. Until this day, probably about 30 to 35% of my clients will do everything with us because they just can't be bothered, or they don't have time, or they don't know how. And then the other 60, 65% will say, no, you know, I'd rather save the money and I'd rather do it on my own. Great, fantastic. Like, and that's, you know, it's fine that it sort of breaks down in that way, but at least there's an honesty and transparency. And that's another thing I mentioned, is that sometimes we get annoyed when we see these long, like, you know, conditions. You know, anyone who's like, you know, I don't know, signed up for something online, and all of a sudden we have these like terms and conditions that, you know, that we have to like check on, and we're like, oh, we're not actually going to read through all this, or, you know. So I'm not saying we should do that, but take a look at other translators' contracts. Take a look at other translators' conditions on their website, or usually they're there for a good reason. Usually it's like, you know, what do they say? Learned in blood. Like, usually it's like they had an incident and then they learned from it, and therefore they add something. Don't wait for that to happen. Look around at translators you respect on LinkedIn, other websites, you know, maybe some NYU affiliated translators, people you find on association lists. ATA association in the UK has some good associations. Look there, look up some of the really good translators, see what they have on their website, see what their conditions are, and then try to copy those and be aware of sort of what's coming in that regard. So that was an answer to what about academic translation. I don't remember, what was the second question that you asked, Annalise?
Advice for students getting into this field.
Yeah. So, okay. So first of all, on a very practical level, we have an internship program. So anyone who is interested kind of to get more real life experience, happy to have interns on board. Usually we do ask for about 2 years of experience for people to actually come and do paid translation for us. That being said, I said this before, I'm not a believer in years or in numbers or even in degrees. I had a Harvard grad who we rejected because their writing was just not up to our standards. So, and we had, and while on our website it says an MA and above, that's our official requirement. Our best Italian to English translator only has a BA. Now it's from McGill, and she's incredibly bright, and she's been translating for 35 years and is just brilliant. And I'm in awe of her work. So the point is simply that we make exceptions, as you know, but it has to really stand out. But for sure, for internship, I'm happy to consider anyone who's interested. That you know that it works, that it makes sense for. In terms of starting out, you can kind of do what I did, which is, you know, start cold emailing or cold calling or but a more strategic way to go about it is to go, like I said, conferences. So if there are virtual conferences or if there are in-person conferences with people who you think, would be relevant, again, not ATA, not the translators conferences, but rather whatever field it is that you want to get into. That's more difficult now with the pandemic. So that might be, sort of secondary, but maybe you're going to want to start reaching out to people on LinkedIn. You may want to, one way that I find that's really good to get in, and don't overdo this, but if you think there's a client that's potentially serious and you want to make sure it's a good fit, you can offer a short sample, complimentary sample. Don't do more, I would say, than 250 words. That's what our limit is, because you don't want people taking advantage and doing 6 pages, and that takes you 2 days to do, and that's a sample, and then they say no thank you, and then go away. But do a short sample. That's one way. It's like lower the risk, always think from like the client's perspective. And if they have no risk in trying you out, then there's nothing for them to lose, right? If you're coming in and saying, okay, I want, $1,000 to translate your article. And it's like, oh, well, $1,000. I don't know if I have that. I don't know if I have a research budget. Who knows? A lot of these scholars are working on research budgets and they have to figure it out. Are they going to use it on you? Are they going to use it on travel? Are they going to use it on, books? They kind of have to make that decision. If you decide, but if you come to them and say, listen, next time you need work, next time you need help, I'm, just want to put myself out there. This is who I am. These are my fields that I'm working in. And I'm happy to do a free sample of 200, 250 words. Who in their right mind wouldn't do that, right? It's like passing up a free donut when you're passing by Dunkin' Donuts in the morning. Like, yeah, I'll try it and then I'll see if I like it. And you know what? And even if half of those work out, wow, all of a sudden you've got yourself a little business going there. So, lower the barrier to entry for the clients, meaning make it as simple for them to approach you and to be in touch with you as possible. That's the way to do it directly. You're also, can work with companies such as ours that work in this space. We're not the only company that does this. I think that we're the leaders. I wouldn't say we're the largest in editing. I think we're the largest in translation, or at least we're the most robust in terms of the language sets that we offer and provide. But be careful. There are certain companies that go on to what's it called? There's a website called Glassdoor, I think, which sort of like tells people what it's like to work at certain companies. Some of these companies, you'll learn a lot about them by going out to Glassdoor, and that may scare you away. I pride myself in the fact that we avoid the experiences that we work hard to treat our translators and editors well. There are certain companies that I have a lot of respect for. AJA is one of them, for example, American Journal Experts. They specialize in the STEM fields, so that I think they really do nice work, and I have a lot of respect for what they do. So there are other companies. There are companies such as ours that do sort of work, and that's kind of a good way to get your foot in the door and to get started.
Avi, this is such valuable information for our students, and we're actually at the top of the hour already, but there are 2 more questions. Do you have a couple more minutes to hang out?
I've got a couple more minutes. As long as you're not getting bored, I'm happy to stick around.
Okay, we've got 2 more questions. First up, terminologists. Has the need for terminologists and machine learning affected the ESL industry? And is there an increasing demand for terminologists today in ESL?
Ooh, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. I think from what I understand, yes, there is. I had a really interesting conversation with, I'll tell you an anecdote only because I'm not an expert in this field. So I'm not best suited to answer this, but from what I understand, there is. And I'll give you one example. I was having a conversation with I think I can tell you who it is. It's the Oxford Dictionary. Okay. Now the Oxford Dictionary realized about 10 years ago, the staff realized like dictionaries aren't needed so much anymore. Meaning, what do I mean by that? Dictionaries are obviously still needed, but no one's paying for a dictionary, right? When we grew up, our parents probably all had dictionaries at home. How many of us are going to go out and buy a dictionary? Maybe almost no one, right? Like, so when we're talking about like, terminologists, so they realized that, okay, maybe you're right. We don't need necessarily handheld dictionaries anymore, but maybe we need, every website that has an e-commerce site, for example, So if I'm a serious company, I'm not going to want to just have my e-commerce site in English. I'm going to want to have it in Spanish, and I'm going to want to have it in French, and I'm going to want to have it in, in as many languages as I can in a professional way. And therefore, the work of, terminology specialists to figure out kind of how that works in a digital age. How do you make sure that the right terminology is used in the right circumstances? How to build out glossaries for specific needs in specific areas and fields, from what I understand, really is very prevalent. But you need to be up with the times in the sense that you need to be able to function in a digital environment and be able to see how your skill set can help in that context. But that's really kind of as far as my knowledge in that field is. It's not necessarily my area of expertise.
Okay, last question, and it's a good one.
Yes.
And like all of our questions today, it is a two-part.
Right.
So what do you feel the gestation period is for getting into the field of academic translation and being financially stable?
Good question. Obviously that, it depends on the individual and depends on the person. I really do, it's hard because it's hard to tell someone who's not, who's introverted to, just put yourself out there, right? It's really easy for me to say, go network, right? Like, yeah, like I hated network. It probably sounds like I naturally, speak to people and, can sell and I can now, but I was not that way when I first started out. And I think that maybe we have like imposter syndrome a little bit when we're starting out because we're like, oh, we're going to sell a service, but like, do we really know if we're even good at that? So A is if we have this network of people who are checking us, right? What we talked about at the beginning of the session, that we know that we're getting, that makes a big difference because then it's all of a sudden, well, it's not just me. It's actually, me plus someone who I'm working with. But I think that it depends on our pace. There's a lot of, there's legwork that needs to be done. So for example, we might need to register as a business. We might need to set up a website. We might need to, print out business cards. We might need to start connecting with people on LinkedIn. We might need to start figuring out which conferences to go to. So there is work to be done in the beginning that doesn't pay off immediately. That's for sure true. That being said, I don't think in order to keep yourself busy, one academic article that's serious can keep you busy for 3 to 4 weeks, which means that, and if you get a book, that could keep you busy for almost a year. So you don't need huge quantities of work in order to be busy. You just need to find the right work. Okay, so this is I'm glad that this question was asked because one mistake that people get into the field, and I get why this happens. One of the biggest mistakes I think is students who are trying to help other students. Okay. I'm sympathetic to the cause of students, and it's tough. If you're a student who doesn't speak English as a native language and you're now writing a thesis that's 100 pages and all of a sudden you have to figure out how to edit it, that's really not an easy thing to do because you probably don't have a budget to do that, unless you're independently wealthy. That being said, I'm not sure I'd recommend that you become their sort of editor or translator because you're going to feel bad because they're a student. They're not going to be able to pay you that much. You're going to end up doing a lot more than you expected. Their research probably isn't as good as don't do that. Go to scholars. Go to scholars who need your help, or companies that have researchers on staff. Don't, I hate to say like follow the money because that's like the most like, gross, like, but understand who has the funding to pay you the rates and wages that you deserve to make. And that, because a lot of times it's a matter of how we position ourselves and who we're looking for. If we're like just following the posts on the local, student board, I think you're going to get a lot of people who are going to be fighting over the same work and and it's not going to be high paid. So you have to think about like, where now the more senior scholars generally have larger budgets. The more junior scholars have smaller budgets. So take that into account. One thing that I do, and I'm sort of giving away trade secrets here, but one thing I do is I look at people who got grants, right? I'll say, who's gotten a grant in the last 2 years? And I'll reach out to those people and I say, why? Because I know that they just got $3 million to support their research. I don't need to guess if they have money or not, right? Like I know they have money. And I know that I'll tell you even more than that. Sometimes people who trust us over time will have they don't even have projects. They'll say, take my money for my grant. Here's, a couple $1,000s that I've left over for my grant. I'll get it. I'll come back to you later for translation, because they have to use their money, right? That happens sometimes as well. I'm not saying that's going to happen to you overnight. My point is that don't believe the naysayers who say, oh, you can't make it into a profession. Be realistic. If you're going to live in the city and, drive a Bentley, yeah, probably academic translation is not your best, first best option. But if this is something that you're doing because you're passionate about it and you're interested in it, you very much can turn it into a business. Like I said, it does take a bit of time. I would recommend at the beginning doing like sort of a integrated model. What I mean by that is start signing up if you can for services for companies like ours, whereby we will send you project offers so that it's kind of like you don't need to work that hard for each and every project. But also try and build out your own independent clientele so that you're not, waiting and for projects that aren't in your control. So that's sort of okay. I'll tell you a crazy idea, which I'm not sure I'd recommend, and I've never done this, but I met an editor who told me that she will take published papers from scholars that she likes, meaning scholarship that she's interested in. She will edit them. She'll then show up at a conference that scholar goes to and hand them their edited paper and say, what do you think about this? Now, that takes a lot of guts. I'm not recommending that, but it works. Like, she gets exactly the clients she wants that way. Like I said, that takes a lot of guts, but I think that something that maybe takes a little bit less guts is turning around and saying, and writing an email to someone, saying, I saw your research, or I've read your research before. I find it really interesting and fascinating. I'm a translator, here's who I am. I'd be happy to do 250 words for free. What say you? And if you do that, 100 times and you get 5 positive responses, you'll have enough work for a few months. And then those 5 people, let's say you do a good, 4 of them are really happy with you, they'll spread it. By the way, one point that I want to make is I have tried, believe me, I've tried every trick, advertising and marketing trick in the book. And I'm not saying that advertising and marketing doesn't work. It can. I've tried Google ads. I've tried Facebook ads. I've tried LinkedIn ads. I've tried, SEO search. All of them have brought some business. I don't want to say that they haven't. Have they all brought enough business to justify the amount of time and money that we spent in them? Not sure. What's our biggest, winner is word of mouth. This is a word of mouth business. As soon as you get your first few clients, you do a really good job for them. And don't be ashamed, by the way, once you work your butt off to do a good job, ask them, say, can you please recommend me? Every single person who we work with, afterwards, you can go on Google and search academic language experts. You'll see our Google reviews. And you may think, oh, it's because of these generous people who decide on their own to write reviews. No, I ask them to write reviews after we've done working with them because they're thrilled with us, but they're not necessarily going to think to write a review afterwards. So I'll say, can you please write a review? Ask them to write a review. Ask them to recommend you. It takes a little bit of guts, but if you know you did a good job and you know you worked really hard on something, that's the best way to get it on. Also, it's also nice because you don't need to sell yourself. As soon as I get a phone call, right, and the phone call starts off something like, oh, hi, this is Professor John X. I got your name from Professor Mary, and I know that Professor Mary is someone that we have a great relationship with. I don't even need to sell. I don't even feel like I need to I'll tell them what I do. I'll tell them, what makes us unique, but it's not a hard thing to do because it's, I know that already Mary did most of the work just by recommending us. And that's sort of, and more than 50% of our business now comes simply from word of mouth, scholars passing on to scholars. So in a certain way, you becoming better at your job and doing it really well is almost the best marketing you can have. Again, that's not going to happen overnight. That takes a bit of time. Obviously everyone needs to put food on their table and you need to kind of figure it out the first 6 months to a year. But, be present where these people are present, read up on the things that they're interested in. I'll give you another example, and I'm sorry, I know we're going way past time, but there's a trend okay, in publishing, which I'm sure Annalise can speak about with a lot more intelligence than I can. There's a whole open access movement, okay? And I won't get into all the details, but essentially the principle, the guiding principle is that scholarship, right? You've probably all come across articles in the past where you wanted to read an article, you find it online, and boom, you have to pay $80 just to read the article. And you're like, all right, forget that, moving on. Either you go via the NYU library and then you get access to it, or you just, you just move on. And there's a whole movement to come along and say, no, like scholarship should be open. If we're paying for research, we're paying, taxpayer money is going towards research, everyone should be able to read that research. If I've got a grandmother who's, God forbid, dying of cancer, I want to be able to read up and understand what's going on and if there's treatments and why should I be limited? So the open access movement has come along and like really turned publishing on its head. Now, open access is something which really impacts researchers. Okay, does it have to do with translation or editing specifically? Not necessarily, but it like changes the world. Now, I'm fascinated by the topic, so I just read up. On it, and I just read as much as I could because I thought it was really interesting, and it has to do with like really principle values versus big money that publishers are making, and there's a lot of like sort of politics, and I find it really interesting. Now, I was then approached by a university who was we were talking about like, oh, can you come and give a lecture? And they said, well, what would you want to give on? And I said, open access is really interesting. Maybe I could give a lecture on that, right? And am I officially trained in open access? No, but it's something that scholars find fascinating, and I'll be lecturing on open access twice in the next month. Not because I'm between us, there's no credentials there. It's autodidactic. I read enough till and I spoke to enough people till I felt like I knew something about it. And that made me a bit unique because that I have a skill or a knowledge that others don't have. So just read, just be involved in, if you want to be in academia, understand what it is that academics are dealing with and facing. Google what it means to, what are the difficulties of publishing an article? Biggest challenges, most common reasons that articles are rejected, most common mistakes academics make and then all of a sudden you become the savior who swoops in and makes sure they don't make that mistake. You've made yourself into, an invaluable piece. There are scholars who at this point are so connected to our editors and translators that I feel like it's unhealthy, because they're so dependent on them. Sometimes they even use it and it's a bad thing. Sometimes they use it as a crutch. They'll write a draft and say, oh, I know ALE is just going to turn this into gold anyway. And sometimes we'll have to turn around and say, hey, go back and do a little bit more work, right? Because, so you don't want to become a crutch. But anyway, I hope that answers that question.
Well, this has been great, and thanks for everyone who stayed after, because you got some trade secrets in there. Could you take a very quick question from Seth, who has his hand up?
Please, go ahead, Seth.
Okay, Seth.
I think you're on mute, Seth.
Oh, you hear me now?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I've actually shared this idea with Annalise before, but I've had this idea, with all the research papers I have access to the NYU library, to contact the scholars themselves, like maybe not like as an immediate selling point, more like, like a long-term thing. Like, I wrote a, paper, with which I cited your paper as a way to start, making yourself known, but I don't know, the strategies, other than, seeking the ones that would have bigger budgets, like grants that you mentioned.
Yeah. So, okay. First of all, I did this when I was a bachelor student. I decided I was going to be a smart ass, and I decided to send a paper that I wrote to all the scholars who I quoted in it, because I thought that would be cool. I don't know what I was thinking. And some of them were very kind and gave me really nice feedback, and I was really appreciative. And some of them are like, one of them even turned around to me and said, "You didn't quote me enough. I'm upset." So that was like a learning experience, which is ironic because if a scholar needs to be quoted by a bachelor student, then like, that's a bit of a that doesn't say much about them. I definitely think that you can put it this way: the connection that you have doesn't need to be that deep. Meaning, if it's someone that you've quoted in your own papers, or that you have some sort of connection with, or it's a former scholar of yours, mentor of yours, great, that's fantastic. But even if not, even if it's something as simple as like, I read your work, you're already doing something which 90% of other people are not doing. Or you say, I have a background in sociology and I know you're in sociology, that's already enough. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to hire you on spot, but it does mean that it's good. But just make sure that it's someone who would actually need it. Meaning, you don't want to just be going to random scholars and ask them. You want to make sure that it's someone who you think needs that specific skill. And you have to know there are some scholars. In the Sorbonne, there will be half the scholars will write in French and be looking for a translator, and half of them will be writing in English and need an editor. And you may not know ahead of time what they do and how they work. So you may want to offer both. I don't know, if you feel like you can do that, you may want to offer, English editing and French translation. So that's just sort of, something, but you know what? I'm a big believer in like, you have to put yourself out there and make mistakes and learn in small doses. The first day, send out 5 to 10 emails. See what responses you get and try to learn from their responses. Okay, how could I have phrased my email a little bit better? How could I have made myself a bit more clear? Maybe I need a link to a page. Start out with a website of one page. Don't build out a whole fancy website. Go on to Wix or whatever it is, and like just build out one page website with your picture. But also be human. Be human. I can't emphasize this enough. Don't be, if anyone's been on our website, you'll see that I very much made an effort that there's so many translation websites, and I'm sure you've all seen this, where what's the first thing you see when you get on their website? This massive skyscraper of like, we're going to conquer the world, right? It's like, be afraid of us. No academics want to work with someone like that. Anyone who's been onto our website will know that the homepage is a single climber trying to climb up a mountain. And my sense with that was, that's the challenge that scholars are going through. They're climbing a mountain and they need someone to kind of like push them up to help them finish the journey. Be a person, put yourself front and center, be a smiling picture, obviously, something professional, and you'll already be, separating yourself from others.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful.
Pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really terrific. Were you about to say something? I'm sorry. Oh.
No, I was just reading another question that came in, but I feel bad keeping everyone.
Is it one you can answer quickly? Let's see.
Yeah, Jenny asked about cat tools. I'll answer this question quickly just by saying that we're very old-fashioned in the sense that we don't force anyone. Most companies that you work with will ask you to work with a certain cat tool. We do not ask you to work with any cat tools. You're welcome to if you want to. You don't have to if you don't. Because our translations tend to be more on the literary end. That's how I define academic translations, more literary than technical. The sort of like fuzzy matches and all that stuff, I don't know. It doesn't speak to me. I don't buy into it in this field. Sometimes the same word can be translated 2 different ways in 2 different sentences, depending on context. I know that is the world of translation, and you should be up on top of it. And cat tools can be tremendously helpful, even in, don't get me wrong, even in academic translation. We don't force anyone to use any cat tools, and it is not a factor when hiring candidates. So.
Great. Well, this has been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. And I will give you the closing word on any advice you have for our students, and we'll say goodbye.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for sticking around. It's lovely to kind of see some faces, and I hope that we'll have the opportunity to to collaborate. I threw in here the link for working with us. That includes working with us as a freelancer, as well as the internship. The sort of more information about the internship. Gabrielle, who's going to be on with you in 2 weeks, is in charge of that internship. So you can reach out to her if it's something that interests you and appeals to you. And yeah, I'll leave you by saying that just do me a favor and tune out the negativity. You know, there are too many translators, too many forums, too many Facebook groups that are filled with, you know, negativity. Be part of communities, but be part of positive ones. And if you find that on an average day, more than half the comments or more than half the questions or more than half are negative, just leave. Just get out of there. You're gonna lose more than you're gonna gain. Fine, there are positive groups, there's positive communities. There are 2 Facebook groups. One's called SOS Academic Translators, one's called Academic Editors, I believe. Join those. Lovely people, lovely groups. They'll help you with all sorts of questions. Present yourselves, you know, tell people who you are. That's where you need to be. You know, not in those places where they're bringing you down, you know, because it's an isolating, being a translator and editor can be a very isolating, you know, sort of ordeal and experience, which, by the way, I think is very similar to academics. I think being an academic can be a very isolating experience, which is why if you do a good job, you actually can be, you know, really, you can build real relationships, not just like, you know, you're working together, but you actually can become quite close and friendly because you're both kind of working on your own. And you're going to need that community. You're going to need that support network. You're going to need your, you know, so you've got your classmates, which is excellent. And you should stay, and, you know, hopefully you'll take up my co-op idea and, like, you know, and help each other. But, you know, more than that is be part of positive groups that are bringing you up, not part of negative groups that are bringing you down. Because I just see so many of those. And at a certain point, I'm just like, to hell with that. Like, I'm not, you know, you could be part of the problem or you could be part of the solution. And I really think that there's a lot of, you know, there's nothing in the world that can be done nowadays with significance without it being translated into other languages. So anyone who tells you that translation is dead is, you know, I just ignore them. That's the point. I'll leave you with that.
Wonderful. Okay, everyone take good care, and thanks for joining us today. Goodbye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.